It's Tuesday, August 16th, 2022. The other day I was walking through the living room. Lynn watches this horrible series. It's an American TV series. It's like the worst of the worst, actually, on film in some disgusting scenario that the humans enjoy. It's called Sex in the City. Season 3, episode 11. It's called Running with Scissors. And in there's a reference between the girl at the bar and some guy named Tom. Then there's a song in the songbird category of Papa Roach. It's called Forever. It's all about again, it goes back to sex, drugs, rock and roll, which fueled space industry, I suppose, and the sports arenas and coliseums, and the really horrific travel industry that's really broken every rule in the book, it feels like. So, it's like if the POS being, like, if you needed a life-saving measure in North America and they put you in a hospital and you needed a blood transfusion, there's a lot of bags that say POS. They're the majority for some reason. All different, like, I think life's a box of chocolates and you never know what's inside. Right, yeah, that's kind of like them. And then there's, like, the rarity, which is on the bag, it would say NEG. But somehow the POS and the posh, being the POSH, have some kind of like relationship where they like to break stuff. They like to make money off of it. They make money on the upside, the downside, the inside out, the whatever. That's what it feels like. Well, I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I'm part of a trinity. I'm in, like, cosmic territory and, like, extraordinarily rare bloodline in NEG is what's written on my bag. And all of the POS, if you hung a bag of that, I'd be dead. It's a process called apoptosis. The proteins don't match. They're not even close. So it poses a problem because now it forces me to be xenophobic. I can't take animals' DNA and convert it. It's a problem. I can't incorporate it and make it mine at NEG in a, like, if you drained, whatever. Not going there. Not going that far into this hole, but here we are. So now, this morning, on See the BS, they have a mention of another topic that's been coming up a lot lately with this apartheid and this partition I never heard of. But they're doing some story piece on it. And with that brings a whole nother set of issues for the president's ancestors in North America that is now, like, as, like, North American continent and the United States of America. Because I was speaking to a New York State representative yesterday about this as I was calling for whatever I needed to do for my public health. And when I was speaking to him, he says to me, he goes, "Are you American Indian or an Alaskan in tribe?" And I go, "Now, how would I know that?" And he like had to catch himself. Because I'm like, "Well, how do you know?" And he's like, "Well, are and he stumbled. And I'm like, right, yeah, see, because here's where my problem is. In 1970s, they came out and they showed a picture of, I mean, they were trying to define this in the 70s through film and pop culture, what an American Indian looked like for tribal culture things. So there's some semblance between state and federal in protection of whatever from the future, protection from the future and not to become active participants and make things worse. And now I'm looking at 1970s version of an American Indian, and she looks somewhere like, she looks like perhaps something far, far East Oriental and North American, like blended, like almost Eskimo-ish. But now in the 20th century, that was 19th century, now there's a problem with Tobago and with this brotherhood between Cuba and Puerto Rico and Dominican and Haitian and all these islands. And some of the islands refer to themselves as the West Indian Islands. But now, and they're Caribbean kind of sort of in a not really way. There's a difference. But again, things being painted in all sorts of ways and in a silent portrait, nobody really knows. So without having a legend to go off of that's agreed upon, there's that look that now all of a sudden is in, I can say for sure, New York, because I've seen them here. And there's this word Indian that also belongs to a far away country, far, far over the water, either the Pacific water or the Atlantic water, far, far away in a South Asian, Pacific, whatever, by the Indian Ocean. There's this little, looks like a shark tooth or a canine tooth. They call themselves India. So now that gets confusing, because I'm pretty sure the North American Indian, because now there's people coming here and they're like, no, I'm African American. No, that's going to cause a problem with the American Indian. Just saying. And then that goes into all sorts of fraudulent schemes and ways that they're really hurting the public, and I'm just saying it really happened. And so there's this communications project that is making things even worse. And I really, as like the look of a past president of the United States of America's ancestor, and with a very specific bloodline, not part of the POS category. And I'm also in this really special cosmic timing relationship between my generation and the next generation. That would make me the cosmic mother. I had a cosmic egg I was born with that I was going to. I think the Buddha also shows the woman in the lotus pose holding the child that she was born with to bring into the world. So there's that aspect of it. I know I am one of these figures. I know that they're a rarity in the world, especially when they're categorically skewed by bloodlines and so on and so forth. So what I'm really confused at is the lack of care, like how I got so lost in the shuffle. Because I can see the humans telling on themselves. They showed in the 1970s what the baseline was. It was a part looking European and then a part looking something from the whatever. It looks a little Eskimo-ish. They were calling that an American Indian. But then I see Elizabeth Warren, she's calling herself an American Indian. So now I'm like, I don't really know. Because now there's something called a West Indian, but those are island folk. And then there's a very real, and they're very colorful. And then there's a very real country. There's a set of archipelago referred to as West Indian. There's a country called India. But then in North America, someone allowed something called an American Indian, but it doesn't look like anything from archipelago or... And again, like National Geographic magazines documented in vivid detail, like those Doctors Without Borders that go to do humanitarian efforts, what they actually go to visit, if you're not one of them. and social settings being where you might be in the same place at the same time. How do you communicate, and what do they do for a living? For those of the world that have to know everything. So it gets really, really confusing. For me, I've kind of sorted it out, but for my son, I'm really frightened as to the lack of detail in communicative efforts and how corporate structure, and now I also see this problem with some between the Spanish world and football, and then the English world that calls the Spanish football soccer. We have our own word to distinguish, not to upset the roast beef throwers of North America, which I don't even know. I mean, elsewhere they call it rugby. Here they call it football. That seems to have held up. But in North America, all of a sudden, in 20th century, there's all of these, there's no more Italian on the radio. You can't just get an Italian station. I don't know why. And now it's a lot of Hispanic stations, and they're growing in the amount of bandwidth that they're broadcasting in. I'm like, is this a problem with the ESPN? I saw that they used some money from somewhere to grow this big sports complex. They had some wounded warrior on that looked like part of the problem in America. And they were shuffling her because she was allowed into something called an Air Force, which there was no invitation for me, but yet she got in. I don't know how. And so now she's in some, and now they're taking care of her. They're putting all sorts of things together. It gets really, really confusing as to how to keep oneself safe with all, and then like today, I see Governor of Texas is shipping busloads of, they were calling them Venezuelans, but again, it's really confusing if that's really what they are, because they keep getting separated and shipped, and I'm just like, who's in charge of this shit show? Seriously. Why is it so difficult to shut borders down and to say no? No more. So this morning, which was Tuesday, August 16th, it's CBS Mornings E162 for reference. This is where...
It is easier, though, when you've made your career winnings and you're not a young guy who's trying to cut it. And, and when you're Tiger Woods and you have that kind of talent from the get-go.
Right, yeah. So, Tiger, if you're listening, come and talk to me. We'll talk about this on CBS Mornings. It'll be...
Now, my question, I'm just looking at this down here, and I'm like, now, is this the PG crew? Like, we're only, like, 6 and 7, and you meet a girl on Guggenheim Estate, and you have to tell her something to distinguish yourself from everybody else she might ever meet in her life, to distinguish the good guys from the bad guys. So you have to tell her something interesting about yourself, and they told you that if you tell her you have 11 fingers, she won't know what it means, but it will stick. It worked. I mean, that's the PG version. I mean, I don't stray from there, but then again, there's horror film writers and all sorts of problems in the category of adulting.
Be a really good conversation, I promise you.
That's a shoe phone conversation. Hello, Agent 99.
Agent 99. Now, I found that interesting. Is that a Benjamin? Is that a Benjamin reference? Again, I'm trying to get to Rhino, and I got something going on between the crazy donkey and the crazy bull elephant that started some kind of capitalistic fight and promotion, not even taking into consideration the Holy Trinity and the Holy Mother, who brings the holy cosmic egg, or whatever philosophy you believe in. It's throughout all of the books about the special mother who comes already attached universally to the special child that she will bring into the world. What I am really unclear about as far as human intervention is why I was trapped with the wrong paternal feature. And also, in my defense of things that already are known, just aren't being handled properly, in 2000, there was somebody very tall, very handsome, and very special that showed up with that red card in a black jacket that showed me what it was, but I couldn't read it. I could read one set of characters. I couldn't read whatever, because I didn't even know what language it was in relation to. And he already knew, saying without saying, that I was going to have the special child and that they were working on the paternal issue, because he knew I did not want whatever the humans were up to in some form of whatever they were up to and doing, and that it wasn't right. Just wasn't. So that happened.
Exactly.
But it would be great. It would be great.
That's all smart.
Of course, we'd be welcome anytime.
All right, let's get to this story. The Motion Picture Academy has apologized to an Apache actor nearly 50 years after she was booed at the Oscars for protesting the industry's treatment and portrayal of Native Americans. The Academy sent Sacheen Littlefeather a letter back in June apologizing.
Now, if that award person doesn't look like the guy from the Channel 2 weather department, not Sam Champion, who's the other guy? Whatever his name is, he looks just like this guy. I mean, it is uncanny just how alike they look. Again, his name eludes me at the moment. I don't know why. But if you look, that's what the stereotypical American Indian and tribal Indian looked like. And that was peace between the federal and state and the tribal and what was working together. Before West Indies became an issue, archipelago-wise, and by some outside country. What I'm confused at is just how severe the saturation of that introduction into a label that now is like across the board confusing and causing other issues.
For the harassment she endured during and after her speech at the 1973 Oscars, here's what happened. Hollywood legend Marlon Brando asked Littlefeather to refuse the Best Actor award that he had won for his performance in The Godfather. Afterwards, she was effectively blackballed. Here's the moment she explained why he was turning down the Oscar.
The reasons for this being are the treatment of American Indians today by the film industry. Excuse me.
And again, I have no idea what that was over, whatever year that was. But here we are on Saturday, this last Saturday on CBS, they mentioned something different about an identity crisis. They make it like it's between Pakistan and India. However, I live in New York, and I can tell you it's somehow seeped into North American conversation somehow, because they're here, and I don't know how. So on episode E33, CBS Saturday mornings, on Saturday, August 13th, 2022, this is what they ran.
Origin story, like in this poignant scene between Kamala and her grandmother, portrayed by legendary Pakistani film actress Samina Ahmed.
I'm still trying to figure out who I am. My passport is Pakistani. My roots are in India. And in between all of this, there is a border. There is a border marked with blood and pain.
Those borders were drawn in just 5 weeks by a...
But that's not our story. That's their story. But it's here. And throughout what I've had to bear witness to, it's been on a whole lot of computers, building and rolling out different business ideas and products in hidden ways. And I have no idea who hired them. Nobody asked my permission. I wasn't invited to the special clock ceremony. In fact, believe it or not, market makers. Let's talk about sports industry for a minute. I've made note of the humans telling on themselves that before, let's use Tom Brady for a minute. Before he gets a sports season with all the teams, because I have no idea, you'd have to ask him what the specs are on that. But there's all the teams, there's all the possibilities, there's one calendar season, and yet they have these seasons already laid out years in advance. Well, how are they working that? Because in that theoretical mathematic, it requires some date. And in our world, it requires an anatomical agreement. So I have not been asked. But I've been scheduled out of my own life. They've taken out everything that would have made me happy and my life being set the proper way with this extra special child that I had. With the correct... Now, here's the other thing. Things being what they are, there was a flower that I was given. It's a special flower. But then he never arrived again for permanent flower whatever in this torturous endeavor at PG. And I know somebody has an 11 finger. That's all I know. But yet, it's taken a horrific turn, and here we are. So, again, market makers have to have some quantifiable anchors in order to even set one schedule for one team. They set a whole bunch of teams. They set the president's schedule. They set world leadership schedules for the last 4 decades. But they got my part wrong, and I am the embodiment of time. So is there a time council that somehow has shut me out? I have an extremely important date. I have an extremely important reference, and I am anatomical time in a biological clock. I have a second piece. I have a second-hand system that makes it rare. Then, categorically, it goes by bloodlines. So where is the council what do they organize themselves out? Who are they? Where am I being withheld from? Because my life has not been handled properly at all. There is no schedule. I just keep waking up and getting more sick and older and waiting and waiting and waiting. I'm waiting at this point to die, and I hope the planet goes with it. Where are the market makers, and why did they make their mark and schedule me out of where I needed to be? Those are some of the most frightening questions, and I don't even know who to address them to. It's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole Cattaruzza. It's Earth, solar system, Milky Way, universe, galaxy is broken, and it's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361.